So Gretchen, are we on webinar?
We're in a webinar format. The
So we
recording
can't,
started.
so we can't chat.
No, but
Okay,
you can have people send in questions through the Q&A.
okay, that's one of the things I want to confirm. That's one of the things I'll be sure to point out.
Remember to tell everybody where the bathrooms are too.
Thank you. Jenifer, I just was looking over the list of members because I'm a member of a informal, well, you could call us officially retired, but not retired environmentalists in the state of Iowa. And one of the comments that one of our members made this morning was that one of the reasons we struggle so in environmental issues and our focus is water quality because it's Iowa and it's animal confinements that are polluting everything, including our drinking water. But one of his comments was the challenge that environmentalists have is that we have so many groups, so many different organizations. And I have to confess, I know that's true in Iowa. We have an Iowa Environmental Council that tries to put us all together, but we also have the Soybean Association, the Corn Growers Association, the Farm Bureau, and they're not necessarily on the same page. But when I looked at your membership, coalition membership list, I was like, well, this really affirms what he's talking about, right? This is, we just had, but at the same time, one of the approaches I take is, so great that we have so many, right? Let's get them all to be spreading their word. And that's what we try to do in the League of Women Voters, is let's spread that word to a broader audience. And when I talk to them, now, let me back up. I was raised on a farm in Iowa, but back in the days before corporate farming. And I now live on a farm, a local food farm, but I do have cattle grazing. I have orchards. So I've kind of returned to my roots where my family grew everything we ate. So we're kind of coming full circle with COVID. That put a lot of pressure on Iowa's local food growers. Their CSAs were swamped. They couldn't meet all the need. So I think a lot of things have changed very recently. And I spoke to the UMRR board this morning about that. Things are changing very fast because one of the pluses, as my colleague was saying, is a minus, is we have all these groups focused on the environment. Why can't, we can't all give money to all of them. Why can't they just merge and combine into a few big conglomerates and then we give them money? But at the same time, what I recognize is that through all of these groups, we message to a bigger group. You will be speaking.
It's time to get started.
Thank you. Welcome everyone to the Upper Mississippi River Region webinar, as I'm told. I'm Mary Ellen Miller. I am the current chair of the board of the Upper Mississippi Region. We are an interleague organization of the League of Women Voters, and we represent 4 states in the Upper Midwest region: Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Iowa. We are what is called an interleague organization, a subset of the League of Women Voters US. Collectively, we represent over 7,000 members in their local leagues in this region. We're excited to be talking with leagues in Missouri interested in joining us, but our focus is water quality and water quantity in the Upper Mississippi region. 2 big challenges for us in terms of all kinds of issues. But today we're going to welcome Jenifer Collins. Jenifer serves as the Director of Clean Water for All, a wonderful coalition where she oversees the operations and supports member organizations. I didn't count all the member organizations. I'm sure Jenifer will share that with you. They have many, many partners. Jenifer works for the coalition since 2019 and currently lives in Denver with her dog and husband. I always put the dog first, Jenifer. And so she represented, before that, she was a legislative representative for Earth Justice. So she's been in the environmental community for a long time. And I think she has a lot to share about what we're doing in the upper Midwest. So welcome, Jenifer. Thank you for being here. And for all of you at home, I don't have to tell you where the bathrooms are, but this is being recorded. So if you find this a worthwhile webinar, please share it with your friends. The Upper Mississippi River Region ILO is not confined to just our members. Our whole purpose is to share this message. And one of the ways we do it is to record these webinars. So again, feel free afterwards, if you're on this webinar today, you will receive a link to the recording that you can share within your circle. Jenifer, welcome to the Upper Mississippi River Region ILO.
Thank you so much, Mary Ellen. I'm so happy to be here, and I really appreciate the invitation to talk more about clean water for all. So I'm gonna just take a second to share my screen. I have a little presentation set up. So as Mary Ellen said, my name is Jenifer Collins. I also go by Jenny, and I am the director of the Clean Water for All Coalition, and I'm here to talk about some of our federal policy priorities. I will say though, even though I've worked in policy for a long time, I'm no longer that policy expert on a lot of these things. We have a lot of great policy experts within the coalition that I rely on, and who I got all this information from, and who help set the coalition's priorities. It is very much a collaborative effort, so there might be questions about things that I can't answer today. Happy to help try to track them down though if there's anything that folks are interested in learning more about. So Clean Water for All was founded in 2016 to create a space for organizations from across the country and representing a variety of different diverse perspectives to come together to advocate for federal clean water policy, because we all understand that together we are able to go farther than if we were to go at this alone. So Clean Water for All is a broad coalition that our goal is to elevate the importance of clean water for everyone through strategic national campaigns that engage people, build our collective political power, and influence decision makers to create and implement more equitable water policies. And we have a long-term vision in which every community has access to safe and affordable clean water that supports healthy ecosystems, communities, cultural resources, and wildlife. So we started with about 20 organizational members and have since grown to nearly 100. Our network includes individuals representing these different organizations. So we have the almost 100 member organizations, but then we also work with a lot of other partner organizations and also other coalitions who may not be a member, because it's hard for a network or coalition to be a member of another network coalition, but we try to work really closely together where we have alignment. And then the members, to become a member of the coalition, we have an agreement that folks fill out to get the full benefit of membership, which includes joining different coordination, work group calls, and listservs. And then if you look just at our member organizations together, we have a reach of like 15 million people when you think about the members of these different, the individual members and donors of these different organizations, and getting the information the coalition provides. It's a huge reach and just shows the power of that, of the networks. So, the founding members of the coalition felt that the coalition should focus on policy solutions aimed at the main threats to water quality of our surface waters, which were considered to be at the time that we were, and are still huge issues. These are the threats to the Clean Water Act, which is one of our nation's bedrock environmental laws that protects clean water. The Clean Water Act has been under threat at certain points of its life, with attempts at the federal level to chip away at its protections. And this is really detrimental, because the Clean Water Act addresses point source pollution, or pollution that comes from a pipe, and has been hugely successful. While so the waters that meet Clean Water Act standards have doubled over the last 50 years since the Clean Water Act was implemented. However, we still have about half of the rivers and stream miles across the country considered impaired. And that is in particular impacts Black, Indigenous, and people of color and low income communities who are most likely to be on the receiving end of that pollution. So shows that we still have a long way to go, and we should be doing more to protect the Clean Water Act and all the different programs within it, not less, to protect our waters. Additionally, we have runoff or non-point source pollution. So this is a form of pollution to our waterways that is not protected by the Clean Water Act. And it's primarily from agriculture or other pesticide runoff from our lawns that run off surfaces and directly into our bodies of water. And it's hard, and it's called non-point source pollution because it's hard to pinpoint exactly where it comes from. But we know a big source is agriculture and pesticide runoff. And approximately 40% of impaired waters are affected solely by non-point source pollution. So it's a huge issue. And then the last kind of issue we work on as a coalition is the threat from the lack of investment in equitable and affordable water infrastructure, which can harm both people and our environment. The American Society of Civil Engineers has awarded the drinking water infrastructure of the United States grades of D- or D for over a decade, and at least 2 million people in this country still don't have access to running water or working toilet at home. So this is a huge issue that needs to be resolved, both to impact the quality of life for people and avoid public health crises from not having that access to proper wastewater, sanitation, and drinking water, but also to stop that from also getting into our waterways. And so the coalition kind of has different levels of engagement to get groups working on our priorities. And so I'd say that a lot of these priorities are also, the reason groups join the coalition is because these are shared priorities. A lot of different organizations across the country are working at it, but from a lot of different perspectives. And that's exactly why the coalition exists, so that we can all kind of coordinate and come together and bring all those different perspectives together and bring that regional or local example or focus to these issues that there's a lot we can do at the state and local level, but then there's also these big federal backstops and big federal rules and laws that can also help impact people and the environment across the country. So we kind of try to create as much resources that we can for folks to be able to use, our organizational members and partners to be able to use. Then the next level is that folks can actually get involved in helping set our policy priorities by joining a work group and being involved in the implementation of our work. And then the last level is we do have a leadership body that helps oversee this work and kind of helps kind of set the structure and everything, and then groups can get involved in being a part of that body as well as like the highest level of engagement. And then just within the policy work groups, which kind of focus on those three issues, broad issues that I talked about, we work on in 4 different ways. We come together to co-create policy and advocacy strategy. So like different work group members based on their organizational capacity and their interests and overlap with priorities can work then to implement that. And this can include things like we will create materials to educate decision makers like congressional offices or the whatever administration is in place at the time, or do specific advocacy opportunities like sign-on letters if there's like a bill coming to a vote or a hearing happening on a topic that we work on, or a rulemaking that has an open comment period at the administrative level. Those things we can, if we have the capacity and interest from our members, they'll come together and kind of create materials that then can be signed on by the full coalition to show our broad support or opposition or give our recommendations for what should be changed. And then we can then create broader communications materials and campaign materials around those different things that these could be for either long-term or short-term advocacy pushes that then to just help members get out to their broader membership what's going on in case there's like opportunities for them to send out like action alerts to their organizational members, which is something we don't do since our members are the actual nonprofit organizations. We don't have individual members, but we can provide like a sample template of an action alert that then big organization that has like millions of or hundreds of different individual members can then send out to that group to get sign on. And then we also really emphasize and focus on member inclusion and engagement, and so that we can help all build our capacity and support like the smaller organizations that may not have as much capacity as a big national group. We can try to support them in engaging in this work. So this is all the work groups and kind of the that whole structure is part of our broader strategic plan, which we actually just put together our first ever long-term strategic plan last year that guides how we do our work. And through that process, we found that our members and partners see the coalition as critical movement building infrastructure that supports this collaborative strategy development and collective action and information sharing, so that we can build relationships across the movement. And so that is kind of what we use to guide our work. And you can see that full plan on our website. I'll have the link up later on in the slides, but that's one piece of it. We also kind of are working on building a big shared long-term policy agenda, different ways to support and grow our membership. And then this, again, focusing on movement building. What can we do? What can we create to help our collective movement towards, stronger protections for clean water? So now going into some of those, just a couple of specific examples of things that we're working on right now, since I know a lot of folks are probably interested in the specifics of the different issues that we work on. So these are just a snapshot of what our coalition is working on right now in the different work groups. So a big priority for us, as I mentioned in the beginning, is protecting the Clean Water Act and those important programs that are built within that. And so since the Clean Water Act was implemented and became law, there's a portion of it that defines which waters are protected under the Clean Water Act. And those waters are called Waters of the United States, or WOTUS. You might have heard that term. So this, for a long time, had a really broad definition. And then in the early 2000s, there were some Supreme Court cases that kind of threw into question, well, what is a water of the US? So there's been a bunch of different guidelines and things that were created and by different administrations to help further define what is a water of the US. And then most recently, there were two rulemakings from both the Obama administration, Trump administration, and now Biden administration have all kind of put forward their different definitions. And now this is going to is at the Supreme Court to decide the Supreme Court is looking at what is a water of the US, what waters are protected under the Clean Water Act. And what we're really focused on is trying to advocate for these important parts of the water system to be protected, like small streams that only run parts of the year, maybe only after a big rainfall or snow, to be protected under the Clean Water Act, and as well as wetlands that filter out pollution and help stop flooding, because those are all really important to the broader water system and the health of our downstream big waters like big lakes and rivers. And so we want to make sure that those are protected. And so that's what we've been advocating for through all these different rulemakings. And now that question is at the Supreme Court. And so we will be hearing later on this year, actually, within the next couple months or even weeks now, what they decide what they determine to be the definition of waters of the US, or what kind of test maybe they are going to put forward to determine that. So that is something that we've been really just trying at this point. You can't like lobby the Supreme Court, obviously. So we are mostly just creating a lot of educational materials around like these water bodies and the importance of them and what's at stake in this case, to share with decision makers and the general public so that they're aware that this is a case that is before the Supreme Court. And you can learn more about that at that website I put on there, protectcleanwater.org/protect our waters, with a dash in between each word. And so that's kind of where we have a compilation of a lot of different resources around that issue. Next up in our nutrient pollution focused work, our experts and policy leaders there are working a lot around advocacy around the upcoming Farm Bill, and pulling together priorities for that. So the Farm Bill is a must-pass piece of legislation. So it's a really big bill that goes through Congress every about 5 years or so and allocates a huge amount of money to a lot of different programs. I think the last one in 2018 allocated about 400 billion, and it was passed in a bipartisan way. So it's one that is really important for getting a really exciting opportunity for getting more protections and funding for water conservation, because it's one of those bills that has to go through, or these funding programs stop and a lot of people rely on them. So that there's a lot of pressure for Congress to pass this bill. So we have a couple of different priorities around reducing that runoff pollution and ensuring that farmers and ranchers have the tools they need to be leading stewards of our shared water resources. And that includes prioritizing water quality outcomes, which is, so outcomes are one way to measure water quality, and the creation of we believe that the creation of a clean water outcomes matching program would provide incentives to states to adopt outcomes-based water quality funds that would lead to real watershed improvements. So that is one of our priorities. Another one is modernizing crop insurance. The federal crop insurance program needs to be modernized to protect water quality and promote more diverse and sustainable cropping systems that could help farmers prepare for the impacts of climate change, like drought and flooding. And then we have on here limit CAFO spending. We recommend removing 50% equip designation for livestock, as much of these funds currently go to industrial animal operations and subsidize environmentally harmful practices. We know that a lot of farmers are stewards of the land and treat their livestock well, but these big industrial agriculture operations we've seen do end up causing a lot of water pollution harm and a lot of harm to the ecosystem. And so hoping that federal funding can instead be redirected towards the regenerative soil, water quality, equity, and climate-based farm and ranch practices that are out there. And then the last one is doubling conservation spending, which because the Farm Bill is conservation programs are the largest source of conservation funding on private lands. But yet in the fiscal year 2022, less than 1/3 of the eligible program applications actually receive funding. We wanted to see more funding go to that program to be able to meet this need that is clearly there, considering there are a lot of eligible programs out there and applications being put in, but just not enough funding to meet the demand. And then lastly, just talking about you all probably heard about the bipartisan infrastructure law that passed in the last couple of years, which was a historic investment of $50 million to our nation's infrastructure and communities to improve drinking water, wastewater, water reuse, and water storage over the next 5 years. So we have been working to try to advocate for this funding to go to, in particular, be prioritizing disadvantaged communities where a lot of that lack of investment has occurred. And this is in alignment with the administration's Justice 40 initiative, which is a whole government effort to ensure that federal agencies work with states and local communities to make good on the President Biden's promise to deliver at least 40% of the overall benefit of federal investments in climate and clean energy to disadvantaged communities. So working to support that effort. And in particular, we focus on the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. And these are federal state partnership funding programs. The Clean Water State Revolving Fund is a program within the Clean Water Act that provides this partnership to finance water infrastructure projects. So this is a program that has been in existence for a long time. But this bipartisan infrastructure law added an additional 11.70 billion for the clean water program, and an extra same amount, 11.7 billion, to the drinking water state revolving loan fund. So there's just a huge amount of money for localities, municipalities, and utilities to apply for, but it is a big onerous process. There's like a lot of different layers to getting this funding. So we've been trying to put together educational resources and talk to EPA about what we're hearing from our members about, the barriers in accessing this funding, so that, they can be aware of that for providing technical assistance and other ways to support people accessing this important source of funding, especially since we have 5 years to get this money out, and we're already in year 2 of that. And so we do have an SRF, State Revolving Loan Fund Advocacy Toolkit that's on our website. The link is also on this slide, where you can actually see, it's a huge toolkit. It's like pretty big, but it kind of outlines the process and ways that organizations can engage in it, because again, this is money that has to be applied for. Normally, there are some places where nonprofits can apply, but it's mostly actually the utility or municipality that's applying directly for the funding. So it's ways that organizations can engage in the process to like flag projects that they think should be funded, and just make that connection for the federal, so that their projects can be elevated and potentially receive this funding. All right, and that's it. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk more about the coalition's work, and happy to answer some questions.
Thank you so much, Jenifer. For all of those on, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. The chat is not functioning. This is a webinar, not a Zoom meeting. So for some of us, we have to train ourselves to remember that. So questions put in the QA. Jenifer, several. Thank you so much for that overview of what you're doing. First of all, let me just tell you that I speak from boots on the ground. As I told you at the beginning, I'm in South Central Iowa, but I'm a county soil and water district commissioner. You can't get any closer to boots on the ground than what we do. Counties, soil and water district commissioners are all over the United States. We are the ones who filter down the money from the feds in the state into conservation and soil health programs. It's an elected position, sad to say. In our state, every commission has 5 members, but we can't even fill them all. We struggle to get people interested at this level of working on water quality issues. One of the questions I would toss out, not to you, but first to the whole group, if you would put in the Q&A, because chat's not open, if you know, would you put in the Q&A what watershed you live in? Because one of the things I've learned is that a lot of people aren't even aware, A, that they live in a watershed, and if they do know that, do they know which one they live in? So that's a significant piece of information. I want to go back to, could you expand a bit on the Clean Water Act and the nutrient reduction pollution policy? In other words, what's the difference between point source and non-point source pollution?
Yeah, absolutely. So point source pollution is a direct discharge into water. So essentially you can track the discharge back to like a pipe coming out of like a wastewater treatment facility, versus non-point source pollution is more of that runoff that I was talking about, where it might be, pesticides are sprayed in somebody's lawn and they butt right up against a lake and they don't have a retaining wall. So when it rains, those pesticides then run off the person's lawn into the lake and create pollution there. So these are the kinds of things that, where there are point sources, the Clean Water Act is really great about tracking them, because it has these permitting programs that require, if you're going to discharge into a water of the US, that's why that definition is so important, then you just have to essentially apply for a permit to do so. And so EPA can then see, oh, this water body is already polluted by this, what you want to discharge, so we can't allow that. Or, you know, maybe that's not an issue, or, you know, we need you to put into place certain protections to make sure that it's just below this amount that is being discharged into this water body, because it's large enough to handle a little bit, but it can't handle as much as you are want to discharge. So it's just a way to make sure that their EPA is keeping track of where these discharges are happening, and then can mitigate it to make sure the health of the water body stays where it needs to be.
Excellent, thank you. Another point, personally, I live on what I am told is the largest rural water system in the world, Rathbun Rural Water. It's a man-made system. A dam was built in southern Iowa, and that system provides water to the bottom two tiers of counties in Iowa from I-35 to the Mississippi River, and the top two tiers of counties from Missouri from I-35 to the Mississippi River. Not all those communities are yet on the system. I can't quote you the exact number of people, but it's millions of people that are served. I received a biannual report from Rathbun Rural Water, where I get my drinking water, last week, and was frankly stunned because this organization has won national drinking water contests, blind drinking water contests. I was stunned to learn that my water contains an excessive amount allowable by the EPA, the federal EPA, of PFOS, PFOS. No statement on what is the minimum allowed and what is coming through my pipe. Of course, you know, I will make that call and answer that question. But this is a big concern of UMRR, is the amount of PFAS, because some of our states have huge military bases, but we all have airports who use that foam to train fire people. So where and how is your organization working on PFAS pollution?
Yeah, absolutely. And PFAS is a huge, huge issue. So PFAS falls into this category that is like broadly defined as like emerging contaminants. So these like chemicals have been around for a while, but we haven't really, or the federal government hasn't been tracking them. So water that comes through your pipes into your home for your drinking water is actually regulated by a different statute, not the Clean Water Act. It's the Drinking Water Act regulates that. And the Drinking Water Act has like lists of chemicals and has those like allowable limits, and you know, requires utilities that manage the drinking water systems to keep the pollutants within these levels. And so, but it's huge. It's a long process to go through to figure out the health impacts and define it. And as we get more and more of these emergent contaminants, and we know with PFAS, there's so many of them, so they might, it's a huge challenge for the federal government, and something that they're definitely working on, and a lot of our groups are pushing them to work faster on, because it is a huge health issue. So where we as a coalition mostly work around that has been in that area of that, what I was talking about, those different state revolving loan fund programs. So we work with a lot of groups that do work on specific emerging contaminant policy, but that hasn't been where we have led with this focus on surface waters. But what we have worked on is really trying to get more funding for these programs like the Drinking Water and Clean Water SRF that will help make these upgrades to ensure that those contaminants are not getting into people's drinking water anymore. So that bipartisan infrastructure law that I was talking about, where a lot of money is going towards wastewater treatment under the Clean Water Act, there's also $4 billion within the drinking water piece going towards emerging contaminants specifically. So they did put a lot of investment into with this law to try to address that. There is still a lot more that needs to be done, but this was a great start. But there's I think just resounding recognition that there's still more that needs to be done.
Of course, that's why we're all engaged, right? There's so much more to be done. Another question from one of our members. I'm wondering if your organization supports projects that provide security for the Mississippi River watershed, meaning how can we protect that watershed from water diversions to the west or for export? We're getting hints and even some actual projects that are pulling water out of, if not directly the Mississippi River, rivers in the watershed, where they're diverting water out west for fracking. What part of Clean Water for All is working on that issue?
Yeah, this is another one where we try to be supportive where we can, but we focus primarily on water quality issues. So like, again, like the pollution in the waterways and making sure these different waters have the protections and the funding they need to be as healthy as possible for the ecosystems that they support in the community. But we don't work as much on the quantity side of things. As somebody who lives out west, like I totally understand that is a huge issue, just not quite yet something that we have engaged as closely with. And that's why, you know, we're doing this big long-term policy agenda setting process outlined in our new strategic plan. As we've grown a lot, and there might be members now who have a big focus and expertise on water quantity issues and water export issues that we can fold into our policy work. But we're kind of going through the process right now of kind of determining where we have those expertise and where our members see this need, because unfortunately there are a lot of issues affecting our waterways. So so that is one that we have not yet worked on, but I'm not sure if that could be changing as part of this long-term policy agenda setting process.
We certainly appreciate that we all have taken a big bite out of the apple of issues. This is not small. Another member wants to know what groups challenged the definition of WOTUS to bring it to the Supreme Court. Did these groups want the definition expanded or limited?
Yeah, so actually that Supreme Court case was actually brought by the Pacific Legal Foundation on behalf of landowners, the Sackett family. These were landowners who filled in a wetland on their property that defied the definition of waters of the US, but they felt that it shouldn't have. And so they took it to the Supreme Court. And because of the different definitions that have gone through there, what the Supreme Court allowed this case to go forward, because, you know, under one definition, maybe they would have been allowed to fill it in, under another they wouldn't have. So the Supreme Court took this case up. And so a lot of our organizations, like so many different organizations representing like traditional conservation and hunter angler voices, and then environmental voices and public health voices and business voices, all weighed in what's called amicus briefs, or these are called friend of the court briefs. So the Sacketts sued the EPA about this definition of waters of the US. And then, so the EPA and the Sacketts are the ones involved in the case directly, but then we filed on behalf of EPA, friend of the court briefs, or not we, a lot of our different members and partners filed these friend of the court briefs on the importance of a strong definition of waters for the US for the variety of reasons we've talked about, like, you know, the flooding protection, the water quality protection, you know, the need for like the broader ecosystem impacts of where these waters flow into. So yeah, so that was kind of how we were engaged in that, but we're not, our members are not directly involved in the lawsuit. It's between the Sacketts and the EPA.
I appreciate that. I think all of us, if you can see the Q&A, you can see that people do know the watershed they live in, which I find very encouraging. A more local issue to the upper Midwest might be, but this question addresses it. How are you working on preventing the damage various pipelines have caused and will cause, whether they're tar sands oil or CO2 or whatever kinds of gases, and understand, as you may well know, in the upper Midwest, particularly Iowa, we have 3 different for-profit corporations that are trying to build CO2 pipelines through premium Iowa farmland to transport CO2 out of ethanol plants. It's a huge political issue. Is your group interested in that or have any focus on that?
So where Where Clean Water for All has been involved in kind of like pipeline permitting issues is mostly around a specific piece of the Clean Water Act. It's actually a permitting program within the Clean Water Act. That's it's called Section 401, very, exciting name. But it's a really important piece of the Clean Water Act that actually gives a lot of power to state or tribal governments to be really involved in the process of approving or denying pipelines that just impact within their state borders. So that's another one of these pieces of the Clean Water Act that has been, there's been attempts to reduce the power of this permitting program by, taking away some of these ability of the states and tribal bodies to be able to really look into the full water quality impacts of a specific project and decide whether or not that project should be allowed within their state or their tribal borders. And so that's where we've mostly worked in that, but totally understand that there are a lot of these huge water quality impacts of these big pipelines like tar sands and other pipelines. But where we have focused is kind of on these like Clean Water, again, that Clean Water Act piece of it, because there's a lot of other regulations that kind of deal with all the different permitting pieces of pipelines.
Just an aside for you to know, in Iowa, that permit is decided by 3 people, not elected, but appointed by the government. 3. Wow. 3 people have that authority. We have no success at changing that. Here's another broader question for Clean Water for All. How do you do lobbying? Are there staff in member organizations based in Washington, D.C.? Do you have staff based there? Do you schedule times for members' organization to send folks to Washington?
Yeah, that's a great question. So currently the only full-time staff person for the coalition is me. And I live in Denver. I used to live in DC and lobbying was a big part of my job when I was at my previous organization, but not as much anymore. So what we mostly do in terms of of lobbying is just providing the educational resources. So we're doing everything in a very, if you're familiar with the different tax codes for different nonprofits, a very 501c3 way where most nonprofits are allowed to do a small percentage of lobbying and not have that impact their tax exempt status. And so what we as a coalition do is provide materials and resources about how you can talk to your members of Congress and educate them about these different issues, and fact sheets that can help explain the issue in an easy way so that organizations who want to do that can. And so some of the organizations too who just have the funding, or maybe they have a different tax status that allows them to do more lobbying, they might be doing way more of that or even helping create the materials and things like that. But what we mostly do is, again, in just a very educational way, is just provide the information and then allow groups to do with that what they will, because we do want to allow groups who want to do it the ability to do it, and but then we also know that there are some groups have other priorities and maybe won't be able to lobby on this issue because they're lobbying on something else and they have these caps that they have to keep under. So we mostly provide resources, and we can still create resources that go to members of Congress offices, as long as it's educational and not around a specific bill. It's actually not even considered lobbying. It's more just education. So it's only when there's an active bill number that then it becomes lobbying. So when the bipartisan infrastructure law was going through and groups were weighing in on that, and there's an actual bill that was going through Congress, that was lobbying. But educating decision makers on the need for more investment in water infrastructure, after that bill is passed, that's more education.
As I recall, you said at the beginning that a big part of your mission is water quality, not quantity. So we have a question about water quality. Does your organization address the issue of lead in water pipelines?
Yeah, so we do, again, it's similar to PFAS where lead is mostly under, there are different, because lead is such a huge and huge issue because it comes from so many different sources. It shows up in a lot of different places. So lead going through into your drinking water through your pipes, through lead pipes that were put in there, is actually under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And so again, you know, that's where we do push for stronger programs with more money to address this issue, because it's going to take a lot of money to get rid of all of the different lead pipes that are currently impacting, like causing harm to people's health across the country. And so again, going back to that bipartisan infrastructure law, there was actually 15 billion set aside in the drinking water SRF just for lead service line replacement. I think there's like a need of, like, don't quote me on this, but like closer to 40 billion. So it's not enough, again, but it is something. So that's good. But there's still more to be done. And so we are still, you know, wherever possible, advocating for more money to go to those programs, and also where it's possible to change different programs to include lead, because, you know, again, sometimes these laws that have specific requirements, if they don't include lead, they're not going to look out for it. So making sure that lead is included is something to be watched out for in our waterways as well.
It's still an issue in rural areas. And it's still an issue in poverty, urban areas, in terms of the money allocated to change those pipes. I've noticed in the list of your coalition members, if I'm reading the list and if it's up to date, that UMRR is the only League of Women Voters member. So I might throw out a challenge to everyone on this call to at least see if their local state leagues wouldn't find it of value to join your coalition. Is there a requirement for membership? Is there a dues to pay for membership? How does an organization become a member of the Clean Water for All Coalition?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So we do have a membership agreement that folks need to fill out to become a member of Clean Water for All. We don't require any dues or anything, and the membership agreement is really to allow us to capture just some data on who our members are, so that we can, you know, continue towards our goal of being as inclusive and representative as possible of a lot of different voices from different geographies and perspectives. And then it also just asks folks who are filling out the membership agreement to, you know, indicate that you're in support of our mission, vision, and values. Just want to make sure that we're all on the same page on kind of what are our guiding principles in doing this work, and make sure the folks who are joining are also in alignment with that. And you can find that membership agreement on a couple places on our website, which is, again, is protectcleanwater.org. And at this time, I just want to flag, because I know you have a lot of awesome like volunteers and stuff like that too in your networks. We are currently only accepting organizational membership, not individual members. So just something to keep in mind. So if you work for another organization or nonprofit and would like to join, we'd love to have you. And then you can add in your staff and volunteers onto our list once you've joined.
One of the part of the mission of UMRR, the Upper Mississippi River Region ILO for the League of Women Voters, is legislative advocacy. We have an action committee that seriously reviews any request for our organization to endorse any kind of legislative action, whether that's at the state level or the federal. I'm just kind of curious about how Clean Water for All goes about determining legislative advocacy. Do you also have some kind of a review and policy process that you could share with us?
Yeah, so each of our work groups has 2 to 3 work group leads that kind of help set the agenda, and they're elected by the work group to lead that group and help set the agendas for the calls and put forward, you know, materials for consideration. So they things funnel up to them. currently is the process. And then what we're hoping with this long-term policy agenda setting process is that will help us kind of with our big picture goals, and we'll be better about kind of aligning our legislative and administrative advocacy strategy with the long-term policy goals that our members help us create. But essentially the work groups kind of do the day-to-day. They're watching out for what's happening at the different levels of government that we mostly work around, which is at the federal level. And then they're keeping an eye out on that. Our members are, and on the different work group calls, they bring up different issues that their groups are working on. And then, whether that's just information sharing or we end up actually creating a sign-on letter or something like that for it, kind of is determined by the members in the work group. Hence why I was saying at the beginning, I'm not the policy expert. I definitely leave it to them, all the great voices and different folks. We don't want it to be a top-down process, definitely more of a bottom-up from our members up to the leadership, but then making sure we have alignment, because we have a lot of groups who don't join all the work group calls and want to make sure we're capturing their perspectives as well, because there's a capacity issue with joining a weekly or bi-weekly call as well.
So you're basically formed around working groups rather than a board.
Yeah, we do have what we call them our steering committee, and that's like our board. But they're more focused on like the running of the coalition and the structures and stuff like that at this moment, and then creating like the process for setting the long-term policy agenda. But then it's at the work group level where we actually get in the weeds a little bit more.
That's very helpful, because UMRR is a new organization. We're celebrating our 8th annual meeting in May. And one of the questions we've been asking ourselves is about our organizational structure from the founding, and is it still working today? So we'll be addressing that. And we do have what we call an action committee that sort of filters any requests for which direction we want to go in, and particularly in signing on. Mostly federal legislation, as I mentioned before, also state. But I have a question from one of our board members, is what would be your advice for those of us like myself down here at the grassroots level? What is your advice about the best way to address water quality issues at the state and local level?
Yeah, that is a great question. So again,
I don't mean to put you on the spot. I know you're a bigger picture group, but still you all have something to learn from all of your coalition members that might benefit all of us at the local level.
Yeah, what we have seen is that I think taking advantage of things that are happening at the federal level or being talked about at the federal level to have a discussion about this, what you can do at your state level to make progress on those issues is a great can be a helpful impetus for those conversations, or and then at the federal level, what we really rely on is folks from the state level to bring us examples of how this federal policy is impacting them on the ground. But I know there's lots of different ways to address issues, and sometimes at the state and local level is like going to be faster than addressing it at the federal level, which has all these different processes and different bodies of government to go through. So I'd say that trying to make that connection between like the need where if there's like federal conversation happening at the national level around PFAS, and there's something that your local government, you can have a conversation with your local bodies about PFAS and talk to them and be like, well, what can we do? When these big things are happening nationally, or there's just national attention on one area, taking advantage of that to make change at the local level might be helpful, is one thing I'll say. And then just that, never hurt, like these kinds of groups, like being involved in different advocacy groups that are working on this is great. So really, appreciate the work of on the ground organizations who are keeping track of all of these different things, and then can, make those actual recommendations for each locality, or bring it to us at the federal level or national level and say like, well, look at this thing. Is there anything at the national level that can be done to help this? And then, if we get enough of those stories, then it's like, okay, well, now this is like a really compelling case for change at the national level.
We're getting close to the end of our time, so if anyone has any last minute urgent questions, please put them in the Q&A. Jenifer, one of the things I found encouraging, because my personal professional background was environmental public health, the number of health organizations that are part of your coalition. I was pleasantly surprised. I wasn't expecting that. I thought they'd be all environmental groups, but nursing groups, public health groups, it was striking to me. I was curious as to how you attracted them into the fold.
Yeah, public health was actually one of the perspectives we were really interested in from the beginning and having at the table in the coalition, because we recognize that connection of, you know, the public health impacts of a lot of our environmental regulations are huge, and that's a really compelling storyline, because, you know, people are going to be worried about their, like, obviously a lot of people want, you know, clean water for outdoor recreation and for you know, just to be able to enjoy these special places. But then also, you know, it adds a certain level of urgency if you also hear like, oh, this is going to cause me or my family or my friends or neighbors harm as well. So yes, that is just one that we were very intentional in the beginning about kind of soliciting those opinions and talking to folks in the public health sphere. And actually Nsé Obot Witherspoon, who's the executive director of the Children's Environmental Health Network, is our lead co-chair. So she's has a huge role in the coalition and is a wonderful person to work with, and huge leader in the public health and environmental space, especially she's looking at it from the perspective of children's health, but also more broadly public health. And just she's been hugely impactful in kind of helping us shape our public health narrative and our public health emphasis, and helping us like bridge that gap and make that connection with the public health and water quality, water pollution issues.
I really appreciate your mention of storytelling and narrative. I'm learning more and more about the power of that. Just my sharing my personal experience of being on the world's largest rural water system, but it's not PFAS free. Mm-hmm. I see right now that I've got a story to tell my legislators and my Congress people right there. And I think that's a piece that I'm learning as an environmental activist, is what we ought to all be utilizing in all of our advocacy work, is recognizing the greater power of storytelling and narrative where it strikes a chord. And if I wanted to put an emphasis on that, I would just say, is there anyone in this audience that doesn't remember Flint, Michigan, and the power of that story? And yet they struggle today still to have adequate lead-free water. But it really brought to the forefront, I think, one of the big issues with water quality in the country today. So I would encourage each of not only the group on this call, which is pretty limited to league members, but to your organization as well, about expanding that powerfulness of storytelling and narrative to really make a point, because some of this is only going to be really resolved at the legislative level, whether that's local, state, or national. Only by regulating our water quality can we change the water quality. So Jenifer, I don't see any more questions in there, but I want to thank you so much for joining us. I personally have learned a lot about your organization, and I want to thank the members of UMRR who brought you to our attention. And I can see, again, I just want to remind the members on the call, why is UMRR the only League of Women Voters member of Clean Water for All? I think there's room for a lot more league coalitions to be members. Jenifer, any last comments?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all. Thank you so much for allowing me this platform and for your interest in learning more about clean water for all. And I'll just add, you know, on that final storytelling piece, if we want to end it on a take action, the coalition is actively, you know, preparing for this decision day and this important socket decision, and looking for folks who might be interested in sharing their story about how these, you know, small streams, wetlands, you know, have
Yeah.
impacted their life, you know, whether it's just you have one in your backyard that you enjoy, or there's, you know, you see the value in just overall protecting these for the broader ecosystem or benefits, or just the water cycle benefits. And so we do have a form on our website at protectcleanwater.org, take action. And so it's /take-action. So if you want to check that out, we're looking for, you know, spokespeople who have compelling stories and just are interested in maybe op-eds or talking about this issue, or, you know, might be just as the campaign kind of unfolds and we get closer to decision day, we'll definitely keep folks posted who are interested there. So if you are interested and want to fill out that form, please do. And over the next couple of weeks, somebody will be in contact with you about that, because that is something we're definitely see a huge, it's so impactful when people do share their stories. You know, and it's hard sometimes and vulnerable to do that, and then you don't realize that that can have a huge impact on like the policy level. So really appreciate anybody who's able and willing to do that, or knows of somebody who might have a good story and can just share the form with them.
Thank you again for being part of our educational advocacy programming this year, Jenifer, much appreciated. A reminder to the members with us today that all of UMRR's webinars are recorded, and they will shortly be, this one will shortly be available on the umrr.org website. Know that there is no restrictions. If you want to show these recordings as a local program for your local league, you are free to do so. We will also invite you to attend in any future UMRR programming coming in April. We will be talking about groundwater and groundwater protection. That date will be April 3rd, and the program will be at 1 p.m. We will have 2 speakers out of the state of Minnesota talking about the basics of groundwater and the geology of groundwater. And then we'll have a speaker from Iowa talking about the Bloody Run Creek threat presented by a HAFO, beef confinement operation above that karst geology that will house 11,000 beef animals in a feeding operation. So again, April 3rd at 1 p.m., UMRR will be doing another webinar on groundwater protection. So join us then. Check us out on the website. Thank you all for joining us today, and have a great day.